Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm from New Jersey in the United States of America. I was born into an Italian-American family. I'm 33 years old, raised as a Christian. I accepted Islam in 2010. 2015, I went abroad to study Islam in Medina, and I returned in 2020, and I'm now an imam in upstate New York in the city of Utica.
How was your life in regards to faith? What were you believing in?
So I was raised a Christian in between two traditions of Christianity. My mother was a Protestant, a Presbyterian specifically, and my father was from a Catholic family, although he didn't practice. So because my father never really took us to Mass or to church, my mother kind of took responsibility for that. And she was very keen. She took us to church every single Sunday, and I was very passionate about it too. I insisted that we would sit in the front row. I was involved in Bible study and the church choir and all the sort of extra activities that were going on. I remember I got my first Bible when I was 12, and I tried several times to read it from front to back. Even though I was never successful, I tried. So I really cared about my faith as a young person. And then when I became a teenager, things changed. For a couple different reasons, I started to question my faith.
So what were the reasons that made you question your faith?
There were some political issues and also some theological issues as well that didn't sit right with me. I think my experience is typical of a lot of people, at least in the United States, is that what we stand up and say what we believe when we repeat the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed is one thing, and then how we actually live our faith and interact with our religious practice is an entirely different thing, right? So I can't ever remember once in my life praying to Jesus, though I know that there's people out there that do. I didn't really have any sense of Jesus being God, even though if you had asked me, I probably would have said, yes, that's the right answer, because that's what we were taught. But it wasn't like I was praying to Jesus or thought of him as God. I was always praying to God, even if I considered it at that point as God the Father, right? What in the Christian formula would say. The Trinity, again, something that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but I didn't really think about it. It wasn't until I started having the other issues with Christianity, like the political issues and kind of the social issues, that I started also reviewing those things and starting to think, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense at all. And that, I think, was part of what really undermined my belief in Christianity specifically, seeing that how I suspected that this was probably something that was authored by human beings, right? This type of sort of convoluted system of balance between three and one and divine and human. It didn't seem very intuitive to me.
So what was the final thing that made you leave Christianity?
So the Presbyterian Church, they have a youth conference every 3 years. It's called Triennium. And how it works is that every Presbyterian church, they choose one young person from their congregation and they send them to a place. I think it was Purdue University. So I was chosen from my church to go to this sort of event, and it's a week of like worship, and you stay in like the college dormitory. So it's this kind of really interesting experience. But when I went there, I think I had the expectation that this was going to be mostly based in faith and mostly based in sort of connecting to God and worship and this sort of thing. And I was very disappointed, actually. There were a lot of bad things that the other young people were doing. They were sneaking in alcohol, they were hooking up, girls and boys and stuff like that, and doing all these sorts of things. And I was very innocent at that time, and I was very shocked. And I think that really started to get me to question some things. Another thing that happened at the same conference was that this was a time when movement towards homosexual marriage or homosexual unions was starting to happen in the United States. And there was a presentation that was given that was very much had a pro-LGBTQ message. And that was very controversial even among the people who were attending this gathering at the time. So the two main things that I walked away from this entire experience with was that, okay, wow, these people aren't who they say they are. There's a lot of people out there who are putting on a face that they're very religious, and then they come and they're doing not very religious things behind everybody's backs. I think the last piece of the puzzle for me was that I never felt like what I was doing for my faith was enough. I felt like it wasn't sufficient just to show up once a week and sing some songs and then go home and you forget about church and you forget about God the rest of the week. It didn't feel like it was thick enough, like it was weighty enough. And so all these sorts of things, I just kind of came to the 16-year-old conclusion, right, that, you know what, this stuff is not for me. And I came to actually have a very, very low opinion of religion. I identified myself as an atheist. I thought this is all just fairy tales people tell each other, or they tell themselves to kind of make themselves feel better. They're going to die. Their existence is going to end.
So how did your journey to Islam start? When did you first hear about it?
I first heard about Islam itself probably from 9/11, but it didn't register with me all of what that meant. And I thought about Muslims as kind of like a political category or a population. I didn't really come to think about what Muslims believe in a substantial way until I got to college. I actually had a Muslim professor and I started to learn. It was kind of a happy confluence between two interests that I had. So one of those was these politics, and then sort of what was the political motivation, or what was the engine of a lot of political movements in the Middle East and in the Muslim world. So I was a political science major, and specifically international relations. And so I had one professor, actually she was a visiting professor, she was Moroccan. She taught several courses that were very, very interesting about sort of the intersection of Islam and politics. One class that she taught was just about Malcolm X, all of his interviews and speeches and writings and things like that. And another class that she taught was about military interventions in Muslim countries. Through this, we kind of were studying some of the resistance movements historically that have happened. I kind of, for the first time, saw that, okay, what was motivating these people? Because if you're from the West, if you're maybe an American, you think that everybody just believes in freedom and liberty and these sorts of democracy, right? These sorts of political ideals that we imagine are universal. And then it's kind of a big shock when you see that some people are saying, well, we want to live in an Islamic society, or we don't like, this intervention and Allah said this in the Quran, or there's a hadith, the Prophet Muhammad said this, and they're using that as like, wait a second, you guys can't come and invade us or bomb us or kill us, or we're bound, or we're duty bound to resist. And so that really messed with me, and that kind of shocked me, to be honest.
So what happened that attracted you more to Islam?
I took a class at college that was by a professor I was very close to. It was called Political Modernity in Turkey. And that was kind of an interesting class. It got me close to kind of some Turkish culture. Actually, I ended up going down to Patterson. I would pass through Patterson, New Jersey on the way to visit my parents. And Patterson, New Jersey has a very large Turkish population. And so it was kind of because we were in this class, and we would go down there and buy Turkish tea, and we'd buy the jezve and Turkish coffee and these sorts of things, and kind of bring it back, and it was kind of a fun thing. But that was kind of our first experience. After the class was over, we had the opportunity through this professor, there was an Erasmus program to study abroad in Turkey. And so actually my future wife and I decided to both do it together. And that was 2009. Okay, so this is just a year before I take my Shahada. So we came and we studied at Bilgi University and for a semester, and we lived in Üsküdar, and we just had the best time. I mean, it was just amazing. Some of the kind of young students at Bilgi, they were concerned for us because we lived in Üsküdar. They said, you guys aren't Muslims, you're going to get hurt, they're going to do something to you. And we found the opposite, which was true. People were so nice and so helpful and going out of their way. There were people in Üsküdar at that time. If we needed to pay a bill or we needed to find a converter for our plugins or things like that, they would stop everything that they're doing, and they would be with you and go with you through the alleyways and find what you needed. It was really touching. It was really an amazing experience. At that point, and I used to be a musician before I was a Muslim, and so I played a bunch of instruments and things like that. And I just remember listening to the adhan, and especially in Üsküdar, you have all these masajid, all these mosques that are just around, and I would cry. To be honest, I would hear the adhan and I would just cry. It was just such a beautiful thing. I just opened the window and just listened, and I felt this tension because I wanted at one time to go in, but I was too shy and I wasn't ready to become a Muslim or anything like that. And so when the term of study was over and we went back to the United States, I was very close. I think I was very, very on the way to becoming a Muslim, and I started experimenting with Muslim worship. I started experimenting with the prayer, the salah, and with fasting, and I loved it.
What convinced you that Islam is 100% the truth?
For me, the big thing was looking into the authenticity of the text. That was something that was important to me from the beginning. And so I was very concerned about, okay, is this actually what the Creator said? Is this actually what the Prophet Muhammad was given? I knew the changes that happened in the Bible. I knew that different things were added and subtracted, reinterpreted over the hundreds of years. Was it the same in Islam? What about the hadith? How certain can we be that the hadith are actually things that the Prophet said himself? But I got to a point quickly when I looked into those things, it's like, wow, yes, they take authenticity really, really seriously. I think you can even just tell the difference in attitude. If you try to talk about authenticity with a Christian, it's like they look at you like you're speaking French. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's not even on their radar about what authenticity would look like. How would we know? How would we be able to tell this book is actually preserved and this book isn't? They'll just say, well, you can't have such high standards. If you have standards like that, you'll never accept anything. And we'll say, no, actually we'll accept the Quran because of the Quran, we actually know the names of the narrators that pass down the riwayat or the qira'at of the Quran. We can go to the manuscript evidence. There's over 50 manuscripts that can be carbon dated back to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that represent over 97% of the Quran that we have today. So there's actually a ton of evidence.